Obama.
Mr. President, is the Senate currently in quorum call?
It is not.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to tell you a story about Tina Pierce. Tina grew up on a farm in Idaho. She was the first in her family to earn a college degree. After earning her degree in accounting, she served in the United States Marines, where she was deployed to Kuwait as the comptroller for contingency operations at Desert Thunder. She earned her MBA from Colorado State University. She graduated at the top of her class. She then became a CPA, a certified public accountant. She's been married 26 years, just 4 children. Her husband also served in the United States Marine Corps as a colonel. Why do I bring her up? Well, here's why. President Trump nominated Tina Pierce to be the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Energy. She went through the process with the Committee of Energy and Natural Resources, where she was voted out in May of this year, 13-7. Pretty strong bipartisan vote. She passed out of committee and then has sat waiting. What's interesting is the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Energy has actually never had a vote in the Senate on the floor of the Senate. It's always been a position that in the past went through committee, was approved in committee, and then passed on the Senate floor either by unanimous consent, a voice vote, or was put what's called en bloc, grouped together with other nominees and passed all in a group. This is not the Secretary of Defense. This is not the Secretary of Energy or the Secretary of State. This is the CFO for the Department of Energy. It's one of those 1,200 positions that the Senate must confirm, but historically has always been confirmed in a very fast-track process after they pass out of committee, especially when they pass out 13-7 out of a committee. Everyone knows they're going to pass. You see, that's the way it used to be, but not anymore. Mr. President, my Democratic colleagues have determined that Tina Pierce should be filibustered so this Marine, married to a Marine, mom, highly qualified, graduated top of her class, has to sit at home and wait as Democrats block every single nominee on the floor. So she waits since May of this year to see if the Senate can open up enough time to have a vote. Oh, that's not the only one. Jonathan Morrison is President Trump's nominee to the administrator for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Jonathan was the first in his family to go to college. He graduated from the University of Pittsburgh in 2001, went on to law school at Notre Dame. He also got a Master's of Laws degree in international business law from the University of Chicago, University College in London. Over his career, he's worked with automobiles. He's also served as the chief counsel at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. He is supremely qualified to be able to lead this part of the administration. He came out of the committee in a vote of 16-12, but he also just sits and waits because there's not enough time. In every administration, there are lots of nominees. There's 1,200 nominees, and everyone knows there's so many nominees, and so you pick and choose which nominees you actually want to be able to debate. That's normal in every single administration. They all have to go through the committee process, but when it comes to the floor, you don't dedicate all the floor time to different what are called sub-cabinet officials. Those get fought out in committee, and then they come to the Senate floor, and they either pass en bloc, or they pass by a voice vote or unanimous consent, or if they're highly controversial individuals, maybe we'll have a floor vote on this. So it's been 200 days of this administration. Let me give you some examples of this. What's called a cloture vote, a demand to be able to go through this full, long process. Under Bill Clinton, there was 0 of those. 0. Were there controversial nominees? Sure there were, but they worked through the process on that. Under George W. Bush, 0 cloture votes that were required in the Senate. There were 9 under President Obama, but then under the first President Trump administration, 38 all of a sudden. You know what we did as Republicans? We pushed back, and there were 71 under President Biden. It was kind of a tit for tat. Now our Democratic colleagues have determined this is not going to be tit for tat anymore. We're just going to shut the whole place down. Now under President Trump, 134. What does this really mean? This really means that we're not moving anyone across the floor unless they actually have 3 hours of floor time. That is a vote on a motion to proceed. That is 2 hours of debate time here on the floor for that person, and then another vote after that. It takes a total of 3 hours to be able to do that whole process. 3 hours for every single person when you've got 1,200 people. You would think during that time, that's the 2 hours of debate time, we would have massive amounts of debate, because if these are highly controversial nominees, of course there's going to be debate on this floor to be able to discuss all these highly controversial people. Well, let's talk about that. For these sub-cabinet officials that are there, there's been 109 of them. All of them have been filibustered through the process to say they demand it. The average Democratic debate time for these 109 people has been 2 minutes. Actually, technically 2 minutes, 12 seconds. So 2 hours of time that they have demanded to debate these highly controversial people, and they've allocated 2 minutes, 12 seconds on average. Well, interestingly enough, 81 of those 109 Democrats actually did zero debate on the floor. This was just about shutting the Senate floor down. That's all it was. This was about attacking President Trump, not acknowledging the fact that he won the election and that he should be able to actually go through the process to be able to have his staff like every other president has had. Interestingly enough, I've had folks that have said to me, well, how do you actually fix this? How does this get better? Well, the first way this gets better is typically in the past, Republicans and Democrats would sit down together and would say, this is intolerable. We can't actually get to other bills. You see, right now, to be able to do the 3 hours that it takes to be able to move it, just with the nominees that we have in the backlog right now, not counting the 700 more nominees that are still coming in the days ahead, it would take 900 hours the rest of this year to actually move those through across the floor, 900 hours. Well, if you look at the rest of the year, the Senate would have to be actively voting and in process 80 hours a week, every single week, only on nominations. That would mean we would not do the National Defense Authorization, we would not do the 12 appropriation bills, we would not do a farm bill, we would not do an FAA reauthorization, we would not do any tax policy, we wouldn't do anything else except nominees 80 hours a week. If we did that, we could get caught up on the backlog, but oh wait, we have to keep doing that the next year and the next just to be able to maintain this. So when I say this is intolerable and have never been done in the past, that's what it means. The Senate has to do legislation as well as nominations. This is a situation that my Democratic colleagues have broken the Senate structure. We got to figure out a way to be able to fix this that works for Republican or Democrat presidents in the future. Regardless of party, the president has got to be able to move their nominees, and this should not be an issue that once they've gone through committee and been resolved, that they literally can't get to the floor, or that people wait for months and months and months to even get a vote on the floor because there's so little time and we're so backed up. So here's a simple idea. Just like has been done in the past, move folks in groups, just like it's been happening in the past. If you go in the first Trump administration, there were 22 separate votes that were taken. They were called en bloc. Groups of folks that had all been passed out of committee. Under the Biden administration, that happened 17 times, where Republicans allowed Democrats to be able to lump these individuals together to be able to pass them all together. Under this administration so far, zero, none. Under the first Trump administration, 559 of the 1,200 plus people all went through that process. Under Biden's administration, 277. This is Republicans and Democrats alike. Now it's zero. Because my Democratic colleagues, I assume, have just determined they're going to be the resistance. But what they're setting up is a process where in the future, as soon as there's a Democrat president, this is going to be the same thing. Because Republicans are just going to go tit for tat on that. That's not right for the country. It's not right for then. It's not right for now. So very simply, we've got to get back to legislating. which means we've got to allow the president to be able to have his nominees go through the process. We have a constitutional responsibility to advice and consent. Let's do that in the committee process. Let's bring those to the floor in a debate. Let's actually pass or not pass those individuals, whatever this body may determine, but let's at least get an up or down vote on every single one of these individuals to be able to get this part of our responsibility checked off. Because this week, we're also trying to work on the National Defense Authorization. That's an essential piece of legislation we've got to get done. By the 30th of this month, we're supposed to have 12 appropriation bills done. But we can't get on appropriation bills, and we can't work on the National Defense Authorization the time that it needs while we're backed up with hundreds of nominees, and my Democratic colleagues are blocking literally a mom and a Marine who's a highly qualified CPA to say they can't be the CFO. Please. This is all about trying to attack Trump, but what they're doing is actually stopping the country from getting its business done. So let's get this fixed. That's my request. My colleagues are coming to the floor in the next hour. We're all going to make our case why this is so important that we actually get resolved, not sometime, right now we get this resolved. So with that, Mr. President,
Mr. President.
The senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank my colleague from Oklahoma. He did a tremendous job on what he just laid out and has also been working tirelessly on this for the last few months, in particular the month of August, along with myself, Senator Eric Schmidt, Senator Ted Budd, Senator Ron Johnson, all trying to coalesce on how to make this place work again. This is about preserving the institution, not about partisan advantage. Unfortunately, this is where we are today. And I think it's important that we rise to continue to talk about this, about Senate Republicans working to restore order to this chamber. The Senate has a constitutional obligation to provide the president advice and consent on his nominations for key positions. This role is a cornerstone of the checks and balance systems created by our forefathers, and it is a process we must ensure continues to function, no matter who is currently serving in the White House. I understand being in the minority, and it is certainly frustrating when your party doesn't win the general election. But as we have heard our colleagues say a number of times, elections have consequences. And while we've seen power change from back and forth from Republican to Democrat administrations, the Senate was specially designed to uphold our constitutional obligation of advice and consent. We serve 6-year terms, with 1/3 of the Senate being up for re-election every Congress, because we want to make sure that we're not short-sighted or partisan acting. But unfortunately, this year, we've seen that unravel due to historic obstruction by Senate Democrats, a theme that goes back nearly 25 years, Mr. President. Over the August recess, as we worked on this, I spent a great deal of time studying the history of Senate confirmations to better understand the inflection points and how we actually got here. This is a common theme. The Senate slows confirmations when there's a Republican in the White House. It started in 2003 when President Bush nominated Miguel Estrada, a brilliant attorney, to serve there. He received bipartisan praise from the likes of future Biden White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain. Democrats concerned that Estrada might be soon nominated to the Supreme Court, they used the filibuster to block him. The first time in history an appellate court nominee was blocked. What started with Estrada continued to shape Bush's term. While President Clinton had 98% of his nominees confirmed by voice vote or unanimous consent, President Bush had 90% in his first term, a small but noticeable drop-off. Much to the disappointment of conservatives around the country, President Obama was sworn into office in 2009. In his first term, how many nominees do you think Obama had confirmed without a roll call vote? 90%. The exact same as his Republican predecessor, President Bush. Next, President Trump. He took office in 2017. Senate Democrats dusted off their same playbook that they wrote during President Bush's term, and while Obama had 90% of his nominees approved without a roll call vote, President Trump actually just received 65%. This slowed the Senate down and, more importantly, kept well-qualified leaders out of key roles for our country. President Biden took office in 2021. He nominated a number of people, not just controversial to Republicans, but actually to many Democrats too. In fact, one in particular was his Secretary of Labor. So his nominee to be Secretary of Labor couldn't get confirmed by his own party, and actually was in an acting role for over 680 days, nearly 2 years without a confirmed cabinet secretary. Despite all of this, 57% of President Biden's nominees were confirmed without a roll call vote. Now, this takes us to President Trump's second term, where he won, obviously, an overwhelming majority of Americans with the popular vote and the Electoral College. But as you know, he has received 0% of his nominees without a roll call vote, not one. So look at this chart. This lays it out for you. You have H.W. Bush, 98%. Obama, 90%. You've got Clinton here, 98. You've got Trump 65. You've got Bush again, 90. I mean, look at this, 98, 98, 90, 90, 65, 57, 0. Does this seem like people are trying to make this place work, or does it seem like they're trying to bring it to a screeching halt? For me, I came here to actually do something. So we have 120 pieces of bipartisan legislation on really incredible things that have been marked up in committee and are ready to see time on this floor. They are things like social media to protect kids online, to finally stand up to big tech and say the safety and security and mental well-being of our children comes first, not the profits in your pocket. We have bills on affordable housing, knowing that now, when you look at the American dream, almost everyone's piece of that comes through owning their own home. Well, previously, you would buy your first home between 26 and 28 years old. Now that number has moved to 38 or beyond. Making sure that we make that more tangible for Americans, that we figure out how to actually address that crisis is critical. And we have a bill waiting to see the floor. But yet, Senate Democrats continue to try to prolong this, to try to put every roadblock in place just to keep President Trump from getting his people in place. And look, at the end of the day, last November, the American people were actually faced with two options. And this, to me, was the most well-informed election we have ever had in American history, because they were two very known entities. You know, you knew what you were getting. You had seen Kamala Harris serve as vice president. You had already seen President Trump serve in one term. And so you knew what you were getting. And the American people overwhelmingly said, we want President Trump back in office. Kamala Harris had said she wouldn't do anything differently. I think you all remember that on The View. Anything differently than Joe Biden. So they said, this is what we want. But yet, we're not allowing him to get his people in place to actually do the things that he needs to do for the country. I understand voting against nominees that you disagree with. I even understand requiring a cloture vote on some. What I can't understand is the blocking, is the delay tactics on every single nomination. These are bipartisan nominees, many of them. The ones that we will be talking about here came out of committee with a bipartisan vote. Now, during President Biden's term, there were certainly a lot of nominees that I did not agree with, but a president deserves some deference. Give them an up or down vote. and move on. Senate Democrats have given no such deference to President Trump, and just like the 2024 election, in my opinion, have failed to present the case to the American people. This is not obstructing nominees. This is a protest of an election that didn't go their way. We've spent an unreasonable amount of time just trying to confirm largely uncontroversial nominees when we could be using it to see those bills that have been marked up in a bipartisan fashion on this floor. We could be using it to work through appropriations bills, which in my opinion are so critical to the job that we do. We could be using it to continue to move the NDAA and make sure that our armed forces are the best trained, ready, and equipped across the planet. Instead, we are nearly 9 months into this administration, and President Trump has less than 12% of his positions confirmed. The Senate has worked hard these last 9 months. So we've actually held a record number of roll call votes. We have been in session a record number of days. And unfortunately, we have another record. And that is that you have 0 voice votes here for President Trump at this point in time. But it doesn't stand to reason that a historical effort is being put on us for continuing this lowest number of nominees confirmed through the Senate. President Trump is on pace to just have confirmed 426 nominees by the end of this Congress. 426. Look at this, y'all. So you have President Biden at the end of his first Congress, end of the first 2 years, 919 nominees confirmed. Now, we hear our colleagues on the other side of the aisle consistently say that we did everything possible to create an impediment for President Obama. Clearly not true when it came to letting his people have an up or down vote or giving them an opportunity to get in his cabinet. You look at President Trump, you see what they did here. 715 nominees by the end of Congress. Then you go to President Biden, 817 by the end of the first Congress. And at the current rate we're in now, and you heard my distinguished colleague from Oklahoma say that if we kept doing this, it would be 900 more hours that we would spend just in the near future. We only have 426 nominees, confirmed into his administration by the end of this Congress at the rate that we're going now. Do you know how many people serve in a cabinet, serve in an administration? Over 1,200. Over 1,200. So what you're saying essentially then is at the end of his first 2 years, you are going to give him a third of the people, at best, that he needs to complete the mission that the American people very clearly said on November 5th they wanted to see enacted. So it's not right. President Trump deserves the men and women he has nominated to be in place today. And that's exactly why our conference has been working diligently to find a solution. The Democrats' behavior in requiring a cloture vote on almost every single nominee is in fact a change in rules. Their behavior has set a new precedent. It is one that will last with this body on and on and on and on. We want this Senate to work again. We want it to function once again. We want to be able to bring this important legislation that we've worked on in committee in a bipartisan fashion to the floor and get things done for the American people once again. And we're not going to allow the obstruction by the Senate Democrats to continue. It's important to understand that a significant number of these nominees that we will be talking about this week and next came out of their committee on a bipartisan basis. Some are individuals whom many of us have known and have worked with for years. They deserve an opportunity to serve, and I think many of my Democratic colleagues would actually agree. Now, before we discuss the rules change in our conference that we've coalesced around, we have obviously made sure that we have been thoughtful about a number of different avenues, and people have brought recess appointments up among a number of different things. When recess appointments are made, They only fill a position for this Congress. So you're not fixing it for the entirety of President Trump's tenure. And also, many of the times, these recess appointments are generally unpaid positions. For these outstanding nominees, it would be unfair to ask to make many of them move across the country with their families for an unpaid job that expires at the end of a Congress, not even at the end of President Trump's term. Therefore, we landed on another solution, the Klobuchar King proposal. Now look, this solution would allow us to vote en bloc to confirm multiple nominees one at a time. So not so dissimilar to how the Senate used to work for every other president, passing dozens of nominees at once through unanimous consent. We haven't had any of those packages here. And look, there's no perfect solution. But one thing we do know is that we have to get this place back functioning again. So I want to point out that when the Klobuchar King proposal was introduced, the Senate was regularly confirming batches of nominees by voice vote, clearly something that is not happening now. This is when the Senate was keeping the same pace, confirming President Biden's nominees, with some Democrats' pace confirming President Trump's in his first term. The blame of the delay of President Trump's nominees lies solely with Senate Democrats. When President Trump first took office, he became the first president to not have at least 90% of his nominees confirmed without a roll call vote. I mean, this chart speaks for itself. Now that we've exhausted every tool, they keep chipping away until nothing is left, not a single nominee more to obstruct. This is truly ridiculous, and it's actually no way to run a country. This is not when our founding fathers intended when they gave the Senate the power of advice and consent. And it is not what our voters sent us to Washington, D.C. to do. So alongside Senate Republicans, I remain committed to finding a pathway forward to get the Senate back working, to put institutional reform ahead of partisan politics, and to make sure that this body is actually working for the American people. Mr. President, thank you, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I want to compliment my colleague from Alabama, Senator Britt. I can't begin to tell you how hard that she has worked through the August time period. There is this sense of we're just trying to be able to ram through this solution through the Senate. She spent hours on the phone talking to different Democratic senators, as I did, as multiple other members of our group did, trying to be able to find a pathway to be able to resolve this. Because that's always been the way it's been resolved. Eventually, it just gets to a point that you talk to each other enough, you figure out a way to be able to work it out, you work it out, and you figure out how to be able to do that. We reached an impasse the first days of August. Typically, that before we actually have a gap to be able to be back home in August, we'll pass dozens on what's called an en bloc vote. That didn't happen this time. We couldn't find it, that pathway to be able to actually get there. So in frustration, Senator Britt, myself, Senator Budd, Senator Cornyn, Senator Schmidt, Senator Johnson, all spent lots of time over August trying to be able to figure out how do we weave out of this. And the idea became there is a Democratic proposal that's out there that was brought to the Rules Committee in 2023 It was never voted on in the Rules Committee when Democrats actually ran and chaired the Rules Committee, but it was brought to the Rules Committee to say, let's see if we can figure out how to be able to do this in a better way. And that was to be able to put in the rules to do en bloc voting, to be able to say if they've come out of committee, they passed out of committee, we know they're going to get passed on the floor, instead of holding up these sub-cabinet individuals, and we're not talking about the cabinet level, these sub-cabinet individuals, put them all together in a group and be able to pass them. We agreed the least partisan way to be able to do this, that's fair to both Republicans and Democrats, is to be able to literally take a Democrat proposal in 2023 and say, let's finish that out. Let's actually bring that and to be able to bring it for a vote. The response we got back overwhelmingly from our Democratic colleagues are, yes, we still believe that's a good idea. Let's start it when the next president comes in place. So in other words, we want to block every single one of President Trump's nominees, but we want to make sure this doesn't happen to us. It will. So we've got to be able to fix this now. Interestingly enough, many of my Democratic colleagues that I've spoken to over the past several weeks about this, when I brought up this proposal to say this is a way to fix it that we think is the best solution for the Senate long term, they have quietly over the phone said, yeah, we need to get this fixed. We just don't want to be the people to actually fix it. You fix it for the Senate. We think it's better long term to be able to find a rule that works in a nonpartisan way that resolves it for everybody. We understand full well there'll be a Democrat president and a Democrat Senate in the future that they'll do en bloc voting like this. Fine. It's the way we did it for a century. We didn't have to have a rule to be able to do that. We just came to agreement and did it. So let's get it back to actually operating, because we do have serious issues to argue over. We got lots of arguments about budget. We have $37 trillion in debt. We need to spend more time arguing about that and less time arguing about who the CFO for the energy department is going to be when they've already passed out of committee in a large bipartisan vote. So let's have the argument over the hard issues, and let's move the nominees that we know are going to get moved across the floor in a way that makes sense to everybody, regardless of party. I have multiple other colleagues that are coming to the floor here in just a moment. We want to be able to make the argument to the American people. I have to tell you, I have lots of phone calls that have come to my office and say, why can't the president actually move his nominees? Why is this? This seems to be different. And people may not know all the numbers and the details, but they feel it and go, why does it feel like he's being treated differently? Well, it's because President Trump is being treated differently by not having a single voice vote, not a single unanimous consent, and not a single time to be grouped together into groups that we know are going to pass. That's not ever happened in this Senate. And I've had multiple colleagues saying, and we're going to keep blocking every single one. Well, you know what? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. We're trying to figure out how to be able to get us back to our functioning again and to be able to actually operate. So, Mr. President, I have multiple colleagues that will come to this floor, and we'll keep making the argument to say, let's get the nomination process fixed, because we've got to